It started with a headline that didn't seem real. Jon Stewart makes GOP spokeswoman Karoline Leavitt cry on live television. The moment those words hit social media, the clip spread faster than any late-night segment this year. Yes, you clicked because you saw that title. And yes, what unfolded on The Daily Show was exactly as intense, awkward, and shocking as the world claims. Because this wasn't just another political interview. This was an ambush, a public collision between wit and pride, between comedy and conviction, between an icon of satire and a rising political firebrand. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see which corner of the world witnessed this meltdown live. Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Show studio in Manhattan glowed under sharp white lights. Jon Stewart, gray-bearded calm, the seasoned gladiator of political satire, walked out to thunderous applause. His return had been hyped for weeks. Audiences expected fireworks. His guest, Karoline Leavitt, the 20-something communications director for a hard right pack and one of the GOP's youngest rising voices. She'd come prepared, or so her team thought, armed with talking points about media bias, economic recovery, and protecting freedom of speech. But Stewart had other plans. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted a reckoning. "Welcome to the show," Jon said with his signature grin. "Big week in politics. How's the outrage business these days?" Karoline laughed politely. "Outrage isn't my business, Jon. Truth is..." The audience oohed softly. They smelled blood already. Stewart tilted his head. "Truth? Fantastic. Let's talk truth then, especially about who gets to decide it." A beat of silence. Producers leaned in. The segment was supposed to start light, but Stewart had just skipped the jokes and cut straight to cross-examination. He pulled out a stack of cards. "Here's what you said last week on a podcast. The mainstream media lies for profit. That's a pretty bold statement. You're on a media show right now. Do you think we're lying too?" Karoline blinked. Her smile tightened. "Jon, I'm saying there's bias. We all know that. But I respect your platform." Stewart leaned closer. "Bias or lies? You used the word lies. That's a strong accusation for someone who used to work as a press secretary." The crowd laughed nervously. Karoline shifted in her chair. "I mean, look, Jon," she said, "people feel like they're being gaslit, like the facts keep changing depending on who you ask." "Facts don't change," Stewart shot back. "Only the story does." And with that, the interview stopped being fun. The crowd went silent. They'd come for laughs, but stayed for a debate that felt too real. Stewart was in classic form, smiling while cornering, gentle while uncompromising. He clicked a remote. Behind them, a screen flashed headlines about economic inequality and corporate donors. "You talk about helping working-class families," he said, "yet your organization accepted $500,000 from a luxury real estate PAC last quarter. How does that square with your message?" Gasps. The audience leaned forward. Karoline froze. "That's not my department," she said quickly. "I handle communications." "So you communicate what they tell you to say?" The crowd burst into laughter. Karoline forced a smile, but her eyes told the truth. She was losing control of the room. Minutes felt like hours. Stewart's questions grew tighter, his tone more clinical. He was no longer a comedian. He was a prosecutor with a studio audience as his jury. "You call for unity, but your group fundraises by accusing opponents of treason. Doesn't that feel like profiting off division?" Karoline swallowed. "You're twisting it." "I'm reading your own newsletter," he said, holding up a printout. Headline: "They hate America. Donate to defend it." That's your signature fundraiser copy. The crowd howled, half laughter, half shock. Karoline's breathing quickened. Cameras zoomed in. Her hand tightened around her cue card until it crumpled. "Jon, you don't understand how hard it is being a conservative woman in media," she snapped. "Every time I show up on a show like this, you make me out to be the villain." Stewart softened his tone. "Karoline, I don't think you're a villain. I think you're smart. I just want you to admit that words matter, and that truth matters more than the party line." "So you get to decide what's true?" she fired back. "No," he said quietly, Reality does. The audience fell dead silent. The moment hung in the air like a verdict. And then, for the first time, Karoline's voice cracked. "You don't know what it's like to be laughed at for your beliefs," she said, eyes watering. "I've worked my whole life to be taken seriously, and every time I get on a stage, someone like you makes me look like a joke." Gasps. Even Stewart looked stunned. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. That was the moment the show went viral. Karoline wiping away tears, Stewart leaning forward, hands folded, eyes softening. "Karoline," he said gently, "I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because we keep playing the same game. I think you're better than the script they gave you." The crowd burst into applause, loud, thunderous, emotional. Karoline nodded slightly, looking down. That clip will be viewed by over 40 million people in 24 hours. Some called it a masterclass in humility. Others called it bullying dressed as comedy. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was unlike anything late-night TV had ever seen. Backstage, producers scrambled to decide whether to cut the emotional exchange for broadcast. Jon insisted they keep it. "Leave it raw," he said. "If we're going to preach authenticity, let's live it." And he was right. The rawness was what made it real. By the next morning, clips of the show had taken over YouTube and Twitter. Major news networks replayed the moment on loop: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, each offering a different version of the truth. But the real story was just beginning, because behind the headlines, both Jon Stewart and Karoline Leavitt were about to face the full weight of public reaction. The next morning, America woke up divided, again. Except this time, it wasn't Congress that split the nation. It was a 9-minute interview on The Daily Show. By sunrise, the segment had been chopped, captioned, and uploaded to every corner of social media. Headlines screamed across platforms. "Stewart makes young spokeswoman cry." "Jon Stewart destroys Karoline Leavitt in viral showdown." "Comedy turns cruel?" In less than 12 hours, the hashtag Stewart versus Leavitt hit #1 on X, former Twitter. On TikTok, reaction edits poured in. Some praising Stewart as a genius of truth, others condemning him for bullying a young woman for ratings. YouTube compilations surfaced with dramatic thumbnails. She couldn't handle the facts. Jon Stewart goes too far again. Every corner of the digital world had an opinion, and all of them were loud. At 11 a.m., producers gathered in the glass conference room overlooking West 57th Street. Screens replayed the clip on loop as staff argued over coffee. "We're trending in 10 countries," one in turn announced. "And half of them think we made her cry on purpose." Jon Stewart entered. Quiet, unreadable. "Let them think," he said. "Truth doesn't need a PR team." But truth, he knew, wasn't the only thing that sold anymore. Emotion did. Across the country in D.C., Karoline's communications team was in full damage control mode. Her manager, 2 publicists, and a political consultant crowded around a MacBook watching the footage frame by frame. "We can spin this," one said. "You were ambushed." "We'll call it selective editing. Say they cut context." Karoline sat silently, head in her hands. The tears she fought on stage had left her exhausted. "I don't want to be a victim," she finally said. "I just want to be understood." Her team nodded, but politics had no room for feelings. They wanted strategy. Within hours, they drafted a statement. Karoline Leavitt appreciates spirited debate, but believes women in politics deserve respect, not ridicule. It went live at 3 p.m. and hit 500,000 likes by evening. As the internet debated, Hollywood jumped in. Trevor Noah tweeted, "Jon Stewart doesn't need to destroy people to make points." But he did this time. Whoopi Goldberg on The View added, "If you can't handle a question, you shouldn't go on a show called The Daily Show." Elon Musk posted a cryptic, face with tears of joy fire, and the clip resurged again. By nightfall, millions had seen it 3 times over, each time in a different context. Cable news channels smelled blood. Fox News ran the headline. "Liberal host humiliates young conservative woman on air." MSNBC countered with, "Karoline Leavitt exposed for ducking real questions." CNN split the difference. When comedy meets conflict, did Jon Stewart go too far? Each network cut the same footage in different ways, turning truth into an optical illusion. For the public, the incident wasn't just entertainment. It had become a national Rorschach test for bias. That night, Stewart opened his next episode with a smile that barely masked fatigue. "So apparently I made someone cry," he began, "which means I'm either a monster or a truth teller, depending on your timeline." The crowd laughed, but his eyes were serious. "Here's the thing," he continued. "When someone comes on my show and says the media lies, I just ask, which media? That's not an attack. That's a question. If a question makes you cry, maybe it's because it's hitting something true." Applause erupted, but not everyone was clapping. Clips of his monologue circulated instantly. To some, he was justified. To others, it felt like he was mocking her pain. One viral comment read, "He used a young woman's emotion as a punchline. That's not bravery, that's ego." Another countered, "She cried because truth stings." Stewart did his job. By midnight, think pieces poured in. Comedy as interrogation. Why Jon Stewart's style no longer fits this generation. Karoline Leavitt and the politics of tears. It wasn't just about a show anymore. It was about the fragility of modern discourse. 2 days later, she broke her silence on a popular podcast hosted by Ben Shapiro. Wearing a powder blue blazer, her voice steady but defensive, she said, "Jon Stewart didn't beat me with facts. He ambushed me with sarcasm. He used his platform to humiliate me and make his audience cheer." The episode drew record views, 2.8 million in its first day. But critics weren't convinced. Clips of her smiling at the start of the interview resurfaced with the caption, "You can't say you were ambushed when you walked into the arena." Stephen Colbert addressed it on his show. "I love Jon like a brother, but if you make a guest cry, you should probably send flowers or at least a link to therapy.com. The crowd laughed. Then Colbert added quietly, "But also, can we stop acting like truth is violence? It's called The Daily Show, not the Daily Safe Space." That line alone racked up 7 million views in a day. By week's end, Karoline was invited onto a Sunday morning news panel. She appeared composed, armed with fresh talking points. Women in politics are held to a different standard. If a male guest had pushed back, he'd be called strong. "When I do it, I'm emotional." The audience nodded. It was a clever reframe, turning the tears into proof of unfair treatment. Her poll numbers among young female voters rose slightly that week. But behind the scenes, her party strategists were worried. "We wanted a fighter," one anonymous source told Politico. Not a headline. Jon Stewart's peers were split. Some defended him as a truth teller in a post-truth age. Others said he'd crossed a line, trading wit for wounding. Comedian Hassan Minhaj posted a video essay. "We use humor to disarm, not destroy. When satire becomes an ambush, it's not education, it's entertainment." The clip went viral, reigniting the debate about ethics in comedy. Polls released by Morning Consult showed a nation split almost perfectly in half. 48% believed Stewart was right to press tough questions. 47% believed he went too far. 5% didn't know, but had still watched the clip more than once. That 5% was a real story, the neutral audience feeding the virality machine that both praised and condemned it. Then came a leak. Screenshots of emails between Jon Stewart and a producer dated before the episode. One line stood out. "If she dodges, we'll press. But keep it funny. This is still a comedy show." Critics pounced. Was it a planned ambush after all? Stewart's team denied it, claiming standard prep language. But the damage was done. By the end of the week, think tank articles appeared with titles like "The Ethics of Entertainment Interrogation," "Comedy as Control," "The New Politics of Late Night." Universities hosted panel discussions. Hashtags like #TruthOrTears trended. Even the New York Times ran a Sunday feature titled "The Day the Daily Show Broke America Again." Jon Stewart declined all interviews. Karoline booked 2 more. The war of words was officially a movement. The week after the viral meltdown felt like an out-of-control hurricane that refused to move offshore. Both camps, Stewart Production and Leavitt's media team, were trying to steer it, but the winds had their own plan. By Monday morning, Comedy Central's executive boardroom looked like a political war room. Analysts were projecting graphs on big screens. Viewership up 60%, ad revenue up 30%, and brand trust down by nearly the same margin. People are watching, but they're not laughing, one exec said. That's not good for a comedy network. Stewart sat at the end of the table, hands folded. He didn't care about the numbers. He cared about the line that might have been crossed. If I can't ask hard questions without breaking someone down, maybe I'm the one who needs to rethink the joke, he muttered. Silence filled the room. It wasn't the confession they expected. Down in Washington, the backlash was bruising. Some of her own party elders called her privately. You let emotion win, one strategist told her. Next time, don't cry, counterpunch. Karoline hung up mid-lecture. She'd had enough of being told how to feel. Her inbox was split between death threats and sympathy notes. On social media, she tried to project strength. Strong women get called dramatic when they stand up for themselves, she posted. The tweet hit 4 million views in hours, but also attracted thousands of mocking replies and memes of her wiping tears. She was learning the modern truth. Online vulnerability becomes ammunition. Then came the bombshell. Late Thursday night, an unreleased segment from The Daily Show leaked onto Reddit. It was the unedited feed, the moments after commercial break when the audience was still buzzing and Stewart was off camera. He was heard saying to his producer, "She's shaking. Cut the next bit short. We've got enough." He sounded concerned, not mocking. That tiny clip flipped the narrative. Suddenly the headline shifted. Stewart tried to stop the segment. Maybe he wasn't the villain after all. Karoline supporters accused the media of spinning damage control. But a few voices online began asking a new question. If Jon Stewart was trying to protect her, why did Comedy Central air the footage anyway? Internal emails leaked next. One executive had written, "Air the full segment. It's electric. No cuts. This is good TV." That email hit the front page of Variety. The public turned its wrath toward the network itself, not just a host. Comedy Central issued a statement. The Daily Show is unscripted and authentic. We stand by the integrity of our broadcast. But integrity had become a fragile word. Hashtags like hashtag cut for ratings and hashtag they used her tears trended worldwide. 2 days later, Stewart appeared on a live Instagram stream. Just him, no makeup, no audience. "Look," he said, "late-night TV was never meant to be a courtroom. I love debate, but I hate that we turn a conversation into a spectacle." Karoline didn't deserve to be a punchline. The chat section exploded with comments. Some fans forgave him instantly. Others called it damage control. But the tone shifted. The predator was becoming penitent. And the world was watching his redemption arc begin. Meanwhile, a friend close to Leavitt leaked a photo to People magazine. Karoline sitting alone on a bench in Union Station, no makeup, scrolling her phone. The caption read, "Heart of steel, eyes of fire." It was supposed to show strength, but to many, it looked like loneliness. She told friends, "I didn't sign up to be America's crying meme." But in that pain was power. Every politician knows. Sympathy is a currency if you spend it right. Within a week, public sentiment began to tilt. Polls showed that 53% of Americans now believe media should protect guests from emotional harm. Think pieces sprang up across major sites. The comedy that cried wolf. When accountability turns to ambush. A new phrase entered the cultural lexicon, the Stewart effect. It described the moment when satire crosses a line between truth and trauma. Even comedy writers at Saturday Night Live joked about it in a cold open sketch. Welcome to The Daily Show, where laughter is optional and tears are ratings. The studio audience laughed. Stewart didn't. Amid the storm, Jon's agent reached out to Karoline's team. He wanted to apologize. Privately. No press, no PR, just two people in a room. At first, her team refused. But Karoline, ever strategic beneath the emotion, saw an opportunity. "I'll meet him," she said, "but on my terms." They chose neutral ground, a coffee shop in New York's West Village. Witnesses said the meeting was tense but civil. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Jon reportedly said. "I didn't mean to cry," she replied. Then both laughed, for the first time since the incident. A paparazzi shot of the meeting hit TMZ the next morning. Headlines exploded. Jon Stewart and Karoline Leavitt meet secretly in NYC, truce in progress. The photo showed them smiling over coffee, hands resting on the same table. It was the image America didn't know it needed. Two rivals choosing respect over revenge. Talk show producers began whispering about a follow-up interview. Networks pitched millions for the exclusive. But Stewart had one condition. "If we do it again, it has to be human. No scripts, no spin." Karoline agreed. For both of them, this was no longer about politics. It was about redemption. By the following Monday, headlines flipped once more. Jon Stewart redeems himself. Karoline Leavitt shows grace and forgiveness. The public loved the redemption arc more than a fight. Both their social media followings surged. Clips of the paparazzi photo played under soft music on news segments titled "Forgiveness in Prime Time." But behind the smiles, something had shifted in Stewart. He was thinking about legacy. He had won every debate for 2 decades, but for the first time, winning had felt wrong. In the next week's episode, he announced a special series called Conversations Without Punchlines. No jokes, no audience, just dialogue. His first guest? Karoline Leavitt. The promo alone garnered 12 million views. America waited to see if the comedian and the conservative could finally talk like people instead of performers. The night of the reunion arrived like a national holiday. For 3 weeks, the clip had dominated every feed, every podcast, every late-night joke. Now, millions of Americans were about to see whether confrontation could turn into conversation. The Daily Show studio looked different. No crowd, no applause lights, just 2 chairs, a table, and soft golden light. A hush hung over the air like a courtroom before verdict. When the cameras rolled, Jon Stewart entered first, calm, older, slightly humbled. Moments later, Karoline Leavitt walked in, gone with the bright colors and rehearsed smiles. She wore gray, neutral, human. The country held its breath. Jon looked straight at the camera. "Last time we were here, things went sideways. So tonight, no jokes, no audience, just honesty." He turned to Karoline. "Thank you for coming back." She nodded. "Thank you for asking." Silence. Then he said softly, "I watched that tape 100 times. And somewhere in the middle, I stopped seeing politics and started seeing a person." Karoline blinked, surprised, cautious. "You're saying that now because the internet dragged you," she said, half smiling. The audience at home chuckled, but Stewart didn't deflect. "Maybe, but that's how growth usually happens, publicly and painfully." Karoline leaned forward. "When you asked those questions, it felt like you weren't listening. You were waiting to trap me. That's why I broke down. Not because I couldn't answer, but because I realized the truth doesn't matter if people already picked a side." Jon nodded. "You're right. We've turned truth into a team sport, and I play for the home team too often." The camera zoomed in. 2 faces, 2 generations meeting halfway. "So," he said, "tell me what I missed that night." "That I'm not a headline," she answered. "I'm a human who's still figuring it out, just like you." Viewers watching live began flooding the chat with hearts and comments. This is the conversation we needed. Finally, empathy on TV. Is this the Daily Show or the Healing Show? Clips trended in real time. CNN called it televised reconciliation. Fox News called it media repentance. But what mattered was that for the first time, people were quoting, not mocking, Jon Stewart. Midway through the special, Jon looked at Karoline and said quietly, "You taught me something. Comedy without compassion is cruelty." Karoline inhaled deeply, then replied, "And you taught me that conviction without humility is noise." It was a sentence that would be printed on mugs, quoted in classrooms, and replayed in every viral compilation that followed. Toward the end, Stewart surprised her with a clip from that first chaotic night. The moment she'd cried. Only this time, he froze the frame right before the tears fell. "That right there," he said, "isn't weakness. It's courage. Because honesty looks messy. And maybe that's what America forgot. Karoline smiled through tears, this time of relief, not humiliation. Then maybe we both help remind them. Before cutting to credits, Jon Stewart asked one last question. If you could say one sentence to the millions who watched that night, what would it be? Karoline looked straight into the camera. Don't cheer for division. Cheer for understanding. Because none of us win if we can't listen. Jon nodded. Amen to that. They shook hands. No music. No applause. Just silence. The kind that means something finally landed. Within 24 hours, the full episode hit 20 million views. Critics called it the most important 10 minutes of television in a decade. Political analysts dubbed it the Stewart-Leavitt Doctrine. Late-night hosts paused their own monologues to praise it. Colbert said, sometimes the punchline isn't the laugh, it's the lesson. Even outlets that once fanned the feud admitted the reunion felt historic. A week later, Karoline received a handwritten note delivered to her office. It read, "Thank you for coming back into the fire. It made us both better storytellers, maybe even better humans. Jon." She placed in a frame beside her first campaign photo, a reminder that sometimes losing control is how you gain perspective. Months later, Stewart launched a new segment on The Daily Show titled Across the Aisle. Each week, he invited voices from opposing views, not to debate but to listen. Karoline appeared on the first episode as co-host. The chemistry was tense at first, then warm. The same internet that once mocked her now called her the comeback queen of political media. For Stewart, it was redemption with purpose. Together, they had turned an embarrassing moment into a masterclass on empathy. At the close of their season finale, Stewart turned to the camera and said, "We live in a time when outrage is entertainment. But maybe the bravest thing we can do isn't to win an argument. It's to understand one." Karoline added, "And if that makes you cry, that's okay. It means you still care." The audience rose in quiet applause. No roaring laughter. Just a sound of recognition. Fade to black. Soft piano music plays as the closing line appears on screen. In an age of noise, grace is still newsworthy. Whose side were you on at first? And did this ending change it? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us whether empathy still belongs on television.